Okay, in this lesson, we're going to take a look at the one counting loop in C++, and that is the for statement. So let's take a look at the syntax for the for statement. The for statement looks like for, and then a sequence of expressions in parentheses, followed by statement, and that is the body of the loop. Statement is what is going to be repeated multiple times. So for is a reserved word. Statement is the body. That, of course, can be a single, simple C++ statement with the required semicolon, or it can be a compound statement, enclosed in curly braces, multiple statements with, of course, required semicolons. Expression 1, that initializes the loop control variable. Expression 2 checks the loop control variable. And expression 3 updates the loop control variable. So let me put that here. We have initialization, the check, and the update. Okay, so how does this thing work? Well, the very first thing that's going to happen when you enter the for loop is expression 1 will be evaluated, actually executed once and only once. Okay? First, once, and only once executed. Next, the expression for checking the loop control variable, that will be executed. And if it is true, then statement is executed. After statement is executed, expression 3 is going to be executed. That is to say, the loop control variable will be updated. Then expression 2 will be executed once again. To see if that expression is still true. If it is still true, then statement will be executed. And again, control will pass to expression 3. The loop control variable will be updated. Expression 2 will be checked, executed, so the loop control variable is checked again. If that expression is true, then statement is going to be executed, and so it proceeds. So once again in review, once and only once expression 1 is executed, so it initializes the loop control variable. Then expression 2 is executed. We check the loop control variable. If that is true, statement is going to be executed. Control passes to expression 3. Loop control variable is updated. Then expression 2 is executed once again. The loop control variable is checked after the update. If it's true, statement is executed. Then we do expression 3, expression 2, statement. Expression 3, expression 2, statement. Expression 3, expression 2, statement, until expression 2 becomes false. Once expression 2 is false, then control passes out of the for statement. Okay, so that's generally how it works. Let's take a look at some examples. I'm going to begin with an example that demonstrates very poor form, or what we consider to be poor form. There's a lot of people who love to make any kind of loop out of a for loop, and that's really not a very good idea. So let's see. We're going to prompt the user for 2 plus 2. We're going to read in what that sum is, and then jump into this for loop. Okay, notice that expression 1 is missing. It's vacuous. So that gets executed, meaning in this case nothing gets executed. What happens next? Well, expression 2, which is sum not equal to 4, that's going to be executed. So the compiler is going to see what sum is, check it against 4. If that is true, if it's not equal to 4, then the body of the loop is going to be executed, and that means what? We get incorrect answer, what is 2 plus 2, so we're prompting reading in again, and then expression 3 is going to be checked. Well, again, there is no expression 3. That's the update of the loop control variable. Actually, that happened right here, right? That's the update. So the person who wrote this loop has circumvented the third expression, put it inside the loop, and so they are changing the loop control variable on their own. And then, of course, expression 2 is checked to see if the sum is 4. If it is, then that becomes true, and if sum is 4, then sum not equal to 4 is false, and once that becomes false, we jump out of the loop. So very, very poor form. If you need to use a sentinel loop, then write it as a sentinel loop, and that example should have been written as a while loop or a do while loop. So let's take a look at a much better example. So I'm going to declare some variables outside of the loop, a float type for average, a long integer for sum, which I've initialized to 0, a short integer called I, which I've initialized to 0 also. And you might be saying to yourself, now wait a minute, isn't that kind of a poor choice for a name for a variable? And normally, yes, I would say that is, but in this case, that is not so. And I'll elaborate on that here in a few minutes. Okay, so I prompt for a positive integer, and I read in what that max is, jump into a for loop, and notice that this for loop has one simple statement, sum plus equal I. I'm using sum as what we call an accumulator. I'm accumulating a value. Now, if you'll notice, I initialize sum to 0. So sum begins as 0, and I'm going to add into it the value of I, as I is increased from 0 up to max. So, sum starts at 0, I is 0, I add that into sum, then what? I is increased to 1, so I starts at 0, goes up to 1, I add that in, I then increment to 2, and incidentally I check to make sure is 2 less than max, and we suppose that somebody entered 4, say. Okay, then I say yes, that is. Then I'm going to add that in, and I increment to 3. I check, is 3 less than max? Yes, it is. I add that in, increment to 4. I check to make sure that 4 is less than or equal to max. Yes, it is. I add that in, increment to 5, and then I check to see, is 5 less than or equal to max, and the answer is no, and control passes out to the following statement. Okay, so what have I accomplished here? What I've accomplished is I've added up the positive integers from 1 to max, whatever was entered. Notice then I'm going to assign to average, which is a floating point value, the sum divided by max. Note these are both integers. This is an int, this is an int. If I did not static cast as a float either one of those, the numerator or the denominator, I'm going to end up with a truncated value for the average. And then, of course, last but not least, I have an output statement stating what my average is. Okay. Suppose I want to modify example 1 so that I'm not averaging all the positive integers between 0 and whatever max has been entered, but the even integers. So this is going to average the even integers to max. Okay? Well, there's more than one way to do this, but the rest of the code is pretty much the same. I'm going to modify the loop only by modifying the update. So instead of incrementing my value I, I'm going to increment it by 2. So I start out at 0, and the next value is not going to be 1, but 2, and then 4, and then 6, etc., until I reach whatever math.